What's good, everybody? Welcome to Origin Story, the podcast that interviews creators about where they came from to understand how they got here. My name is Phillip Russell, and I am with my co-host,
Ben Thorp.
And Ben, today we have another great conversation, this time with a musician, Devin McKnight, who is the front man of a band called Maneka. He's a musician currently based in Brooklyn, New York, and has previously played for rock projects like Speedy Ortiz and Grass is Green. This was a really cool conversation. We talked to him about his new album called Dark Matters, which is this kind of interesting, harder rock, pop punk kind of album about kind of Black experience, generational trauma, mixed with like this kind of sci-fi, dark matter, like scientific dark matter kind of motif. So it was really fun.
Yeah. I think that, one of the things that attracted us to this, again, he had an interview, and you'll hear about it later in the show, just riffing on this idea of like, okay, Phil and I really like our soy boy music, right? Like we listen to a lot of just like sad boy shit. You got a nice lilting guitar, a gently whiny voice. Like that's baseball, baby. Like that's a good show. And I think Maneka does a good job of kind of talking about trying to infuse that space with some, I guess, thematic weight. A lot of this album is really concerned with kind of unpacking generational trauma. He talks about lynchings. He talks about sundown towns. And so I think he's like not coy at all about trying to find a space within a genre that sometimes can be a little bit light, right? Sometimes you're singing about like past girlfriends and like how high school sucks, right? And like he's trying to find a space within that to talk about these much, much heavier issues. And again, I think riffing on this idea of like dark matter, this unseen force that is like this gravity that pulls everything into it.
Yeah, 100%. I think that is such a good kind of summation of it. And, to be clear, like I'll speak for myself at least. I'm a huge pop punk fan. Like, I used to love listening to like All Time Low, State Champs, the Wonder Years. Like, you name all the sad white boy rock bands, I was listening to them. But I think what was really drawing me in with this album is kind of what you're getting at, that, it has some of that pop punk flair at times. It has some of that hard rock flair, but it mixes things like jazz, improvisation, and like you're saying, like sundown towns, lynchings, kind of feeling uncomfortable as a Black man in white spaces. And, that was something that I personally have never really experienced in kind of, rock music. So for one, that really stuck out to me. And two, it just, I don't know, just the actual instrumentation itself was really, really unique and challenging, which made it a really interesting listen to just happen upon through, one of the few times where the algorithm is good. Like, I don't even remember exactly how Spotify sent this my way, but I'm glad it did.
Yeah, no, and to be clear, I also just like deeply love my sad boy, sad girl stuff. We listen to it a lot. I think you're really good about sending some fresh albums my way, where you're like, hey, this is that good sad stuff.
New sad boy just dropped.
Right, and I think this was one where you were saying like, hey, this is resonating a little bit more. If you like take a look at the lyrics, it's saying a little bit more. And so we kind of stuck around. The other thing that we should kind of talk about is I really love this idea of genre trolling that he kind of talks about. And the idea that, like, listen, you can have a bunch of influences and they can find space within your art. I think, in writing sometimes, especially in like undergrad, I heard a lot this idea that like you have to be careful about the stuff that you read and kind of engage with, because like, oh, it might influence you and find a way into your writing, and you know, because of that, you have to read kind of serious stuff. You have to read this like serious genre stuff, or, you know, serious stuff that is like similar to the work that you're going to be doing, which is like, I understand on some level, but also find deeply tedious. And I really like, I think he in some ways is speaking to this idea that like you can have a lot of influences and they can be a mishmash in your work, and like it works out.
Yeah, I mean, the canon, Ben. We have to stick
The canon,
to
baby.
the canon, you know? And just thinking about that homogenization of art, and how, you know, you have these different movements, especially movements that have been made by like old white men who want to keep the status quo. Like, you read these books,
The OG sad boys.
you know, the OG sad boys, they want you to read their sad boy shit, and then you to replicate it so that their legacy continues on, right? I think Devin does a really good job of talking through just kind of the complicated, and I think the word he uses is jumbled, nature of, you know, Black experience in this country, especially for somebody like him who is navigating like, you know, white spaces growing up, and kind of these mixed these mixed influences. And instead of viewing that as a negative, you know, channeling that kind of, you know, hard to understand mixture of things into something unique ends up being a benefit. So I think that, you know, this conversation really revolves around that question, and kind of becoming accepting of that positionality as he's continued to release records. So yeah, this conversation is really fun and unexpected. I think you all are really gonna enjoy it, and if you do, definitely, you know, give us a follow on Spotify, subscribe on Apple Podcasts, and give us a review. You know, it helps us get more people listening and get more eyes on the show, so it'd be greatly appreciated. And, you know, as always, if you want to talk to us about the show, or, you know, you have some suggestions for guests to come on, you know, you can definitely hit us up at our email, the originstorypod@gmail.com. So without further ado, let's jump right into the episode. Devin McKnight is a musician and songwriter currently based in Brooklyn, New York. Previously, he's played guitar in rock projects such as Speedy Ortiz, Grass is Green, and Philadelphia Collins, but at the moment, his main focus is on his own rock band called Maneka, which fuses elements of jazz, improvisation, math rock, and shoegaze. Under this project, he's released 3 records so far. Is This You, a self-titled album called Devin, and most recently, Dark Matters. And Devin, we're super excited to have you on the show. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, how's it going? You know, obviously, Dark Matters came out, I think, in March, was it? How's that been?
It's been pretty great. Yeah, I mean, I was like pretty shocked that people were into it. So
that seems pretty like freeing. I feel like in some ways, of like kind of being able to like work on your project, you know, invest yourself in that, and then, you know, put it out there, and like whatever happens. Like, I think something that Ben and I struggle with a lot is like the inverse of that, of like, okay, releasing something and then like stressing over like, oh, I need to like, you know, post it everywhere. I need to like hope people listen to it, and it can feel kind of demoralizing, I think, in some ways. So like, it seems like you have a more like healthy relationship of like, I'm releasing this for me and we'll see what happens.
I kind of feel like the pandemic also, you know, was just kind of like this pretty dark cloud following me around for a while, because, you know, I was working at a library that was like empty and the lights were all off all the time. I don't know why. And yeah, you know, I saw like three people total. Yeah, it's just like, when I was done with it, I was just like, well, I mean, sounds good to me. I hope anyone else cares or like this. You know, I don't know, because the last two albums, I definitely had a lot more context from society to go off of, and now all I have is like Twitter and whatever other doom scrolling I was doing, and yeah, well, it's easier for me to keep my pulse on what I want and also what other people want when it's like you're playing shows, you're going on tour, you're doing the whole like go around that like a musician does, and
Mm-hmm.
you're seeing people at like every corner of the country, and you can kind of see like things from other people's perspectives and play with other bands and see how they do stuff and like whatever. So pre-pandemic, it was totally easier to see yourself fitting into that in some sort of way.
Yeah, I'm wondering if you ever, pre-pandemic, would you like try new songs out and then be able to have like a real-time almost reaction at a concert where you're like, "Oh, the feedback is good. This feels good. This is working." And then like I imagine you're in a basement or you're in the library now and you're like, "I mean, I feel like I like this song, but I've got no inputs."
Yeah, I think that's totally. I did that a lot. Like that was kind of like, I don't know. You hear comedians go out and try out their material on the road just to see in small clubs, and like honestly, like that's the beauty of like playing all the time. It's like, I have this idea, I just recorded it, I showed my band, let's see how it works. You know what I mean? See if people like engage in it or whatever, So like that little like, kind of informal sneak peek kind of thing was like is a very good tool. And yes, so I mean like I don't know, I had like a handful of people that I could show recordings to, my few bandmates and collaborators. I mean, I don't really have many of those either. So the project is like 95% me. So maybe I'll say 90. I don't know. But it's mostly me. So it's really easy to get stuck in my own thoughts and stuff. So
What, like, because you were saying, like it's great to see Dark Matters kind of getting a lot of feedback and like fan response and things like that. We're definitely going to get like into the specifics of that album and get into Devin as well, but maybe one way to break that open is in some interviews I've read with you talk about how like the process creating an album like Devin versus Dark Matters, how like Dark Matters in some ways is more not approachable isn't the right word, but I guess like it's a little bit more easily digestible maybe than Devin was. Like it's something that I don't know. I guess I don't know exactly how to phrase it, but like I think you're basically talking about how Dark Matters more people can listen to it, and I'm wondering like kind of what the process was like. Going into making this album, was that like always kind of the idea after Devin, or did that kind of happen naturally?
The previous record was, a little bit, uh, I don't know, heavier, like
Mm-hmm.
distorted, um, kind of drawing from a little bit more like of the punk and, you know, other kinds of influences that I've had. And, it's just kind of like what I felt myself being into and wanting to explore. Um, and I think moving forward, what I was kind of thinking was I did like so on Devin there were a few like jazzy kind of interludes and like featuring like my cousin playing saxophone and some other kind of like just looser kind of things.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, why don't I try to like do that a little bit more? Um, And then I think, you know, I think part of a lot of heavy music or fast paced music or whatever sludgy stuff, you, you find more in common with that in your youth, maybe. So I was kind of trying to scratch this itch, and maybe I don't know, maybe I scratched it, and so I was like, you know, let me clean it up a little bit, you know, and do something that maybe just focuses more on, you know, richness of melody. You know, it's easier to sing over cleaner stuff sometimes too, and it's not so loud all the time, and just kind of like explore what that's like, you know.
Mm.
So yeah, that was definitely an intentional move. I just like, I don't know. Yeah, it's always like, for me, whenever there's a new thing, it's always me trying to like suss something out, you know, that I'm interested in, and seeing how far that'll take me.
Well, I was just gonna say, like, you know, I don't exactly recall how I found Dark Matters, but that was like my gateway into your music. And I just remember like the first time I was listening to the album, I was like walking to, I think, get groceries or something, and I was so floored by like what you're talking about, like those kinds of jazzy interludes, those kind of improvised moments interspersed with like some of like the heavier guitar parts. And that's something that, you know, with my in my own background, like in my own music listening background, I don't have a lot of experience hearing. So I don't know if that's coming from like a long lineage that I'm unaware of, but like that's something that I was like, damn, this was really different. And I think especially for me, like as a black person, like I'm like always looking for, like, I want to hear like black people in rock, and like to hear that kind of that fusion, this really really worked for me.
Oh, well, thank you. Um, yeah, I mean, uh, you know, for me, guess there's kind of always going to be a lot going on. You know, I grew up, you know, my parents didn't really listen to rock music. I do have this moment though that I've been sharing with some of my guitar students. Um, my dad really loved that song, "Cult of Personality," and
It's a good song.
yeah, he would like turn it up like super loud in the living room and like play air guitar and stuff. And I was just sort of like, well, this isn't your normal like R&B funk kind of thing that he usually plays. And you know, that's, you know, Vernon Reid is like a prominent black guitarist. And yeah, so like piecing together like a rock influence was very kind of like touch and go. Like, you know, eventually we moved out to the suburbs, and I started hearing bands like Green Day, Nirvana tossed around, Smashing Pumpkins and stuff, and I was like, oh, cool, look, what's this stuff? Um, so then, yeah, like at different points, like my friends in like high school and middle school showed me a lot of punk rock. In college, I got more into some hardcore stuff. Um, and yeah, that kind of brought me to where I was, in like Grass is Green and Speedy Ortiz, kind of in that zone
Mm-hmm.
eventually. But I would say like, um, yeah, there, you know, hip hop and rap were like my first, like, this is like the music that I like really identify with, stuff like that. So I mean, yeah, it's gonna be a little jumbled up when you're talking to me. So um, I've sort of learned from some other friends of mine, you know, don't be afraid of that. you know, you got to kind of like lean in, because anyone can just like go out and make a pop punk record, and you know, any white kid can just do that thing, but they can't do, you know, they can't do the stuff that like that I do or whatever, because my influences is just going to be kind of wacky, and it's not a bad thing. I used to think it was a bad thing, and I used to be like, "Oh, like I don't fit in. Like, oh, what am I going to do?" But turns out, I don't need to worry about that. You know, just do my thing and show up for work and try to make myself happy for once. You know.
I think you I saw it in an interview you described Devin as genre trolling, which feels like something similar to kind of what you're saying right here, which is like just like such a big mishmash of kind of influences that you're making work and not kind of really worrying about I guess like how it fits. Can you talk about that a little bit more?
Well, I kind of got that from a friend who's like a writer who like did some thing from the uh he did an article on me in the Baffler magazine, which is like a really cool write up. But I've known him for a long time, so we had a pretty lengthy discussion, and he kind of used that uh, when we were talking, and I decided to talk about that more. But yeah, it's like I kind of like, you know, because there are a lot of different types of like rock music, you know, lowercase r rock, you know, and I've been influenced by a lot of it. You know, I mean, one of the singles off that record is very pop punk, sort of emo, sort of, you know, and that's maybe not the biggest phase of my life, but it definitely was a phase, and I just wanted to make a song like that, you know, so it doesn't like speak to like, you know, the record as a whole, but it's just something I felt like doing. So I did it.
No, I mean, I really fuck with that. Like your whole idea of like, you know, kind of becoming more comfortable with being like, the things I'm going to make are going to be a lot. They're going to have a lot of different moving parts, and they're going to feel like there's going to be friction between them. And that's what makes it good. You know, like I think when I put on Dark Matters, for instance, it's like, I feel as if I'm entering another universe. It's like something that I've never experienced before in that same kind of genre. And, you know, I think it's interesting that like the title, at least how I'm thinking about the title is like, you know, there's kind of two angles to it. There's like that science aspect of like dark matter and like these kind of ideas that you're working through on the album around like scientific motifs, but that's juxtaposed, right, with like dark matters as like Black experience and thinking about like multi-generational trauma and you know, navigating white spaces as a Black person. Like those are all things that, you know, are really close to my heart and things that I don't ever hear when I listen to music, like rock music. So like when I listen to this album, for instance, just to give you like an example, like Runaway, I think of that track and I'm like, damn, like I'm never going to hear that track again from anyone else. You know, that feels like so only possible in this kind of soup that you've made, right? So I think like that's just like a really powerful thing to kind of lean into.
Yeah, yeah. It's the only folk song I've ever written in this group. So country music and folk music were, you know, genres of music that like originated with the Black experience, and they've sort of been directed away in large part. So like, you know, I mean, it'd be great to place myself in that sort of kind of, I don't know, maybe forcibly, you know,
Yeah.
just sort of like place myself in the middle of that and just like sit down and, you know, people seem to really like that song, so I'm really happy with that. I've only played it out live once, uh, so well, you know, we're gonna be doing it more, but
Mm-hmm.
I think you're touching on. I had a question because in the kind of write up for Dark Matters, there's a moment where you're talking about wanting to inject like actually sad themes into a genre, saying sad boy rock that doesn't normally, I guess, like vaguely intimates those sad boy themes. Without like maybe actually grappling with stuff. And Runaway, I think specifically, is talking about sundown towns. I'm wondering if you can, I guess, expand on that and talk about like what that means for you.
I don't want to make it seem like I'm like being dismissive of like, you know, my sad boy
No.
colleagues or anything, because everybody struggles. There's stuff. It's just like maybe my brand of struggling is like comes from a place that like I don't completely understand. They definitely wouldn't understand. And that like maybe this is me starting to try to like unravel that. I started to learn a lot about certain facets of Black history that, I mean, now you see they're trying to like take that stuff out of textbooks,
right?
And stuff, and it wasn't when I grew up. I mean, I came from Montgomery County, Maryland, which is in the DC area, and it's pretty liberal, and like we had a very basic class that everyone took about civil rights movement, like Reconstruction era stuff, but it was very, very basic. We're not talking like, fists in the air. Like this is like very, but literally nobody else has that stuff. And I'm just like, wow, and then like I started, seeing things in media, internet stuff, like whatever about like sundown towns and the wave of massacres that were going on in the early about 100 years ago, and it's just brutal. It's like it's terrorism, like, and my elders never told me about this stuff. They probably were kind of like, maybe this is a little bit too heavy for a kid or an adolescent to like handle or whatever. So you just in fact my parents did tell me that they never really wanted me to feel like so angry or so displaced or whatever, so much so that I couldn't move forward in the world and like be the best that I could be or whatever. So I'm definitely appreciative of that. But when you start to learn about like kind of the brutal nature of like post-slavery America, and you think about how like, I don't know, like what does mental health mean then to somebody who is not just coming from the level playing field that we've been told about, like even like Asian Americans, like Chinese Americans, they had a terrible go of it for a long time here, and generational trauma is something that's very real. I mean, like so then when you're dealing with like the trauma of not just yourself but like people that lived 2 generations before you, then you're just like, where did that come from? And you have no idea. You know what I mean? It's not necessarily coming from your own life experience. I grew up well. Like I had a good life, I had good parents, good family. But then you sort of start to piece things together, and you're like, oh wow, like, and yeah, that's just like another weight to kind of carry around, and it's maybe it could be thought of as heavier, you know, but I don't want to make those types of comparisons with people because I don't want to assume too much. But for me, yeah, it's just kind of like a lot of the times when I see like some you know man on stage who's like sad about it, like his girlfriend liking somebody else or something. You're just kind of like, dude, like
Right.
you're gonna sit down and write a whole ass song about that, or like what, you know what I mean?
I feel that 100%, and I feel like that's a very like genuine. Yeah, and I guess I'm wondering how you're thinking about how your album fits into that as a way to kind of subvert that, because I think it's true. Like I think it's true that a lot of those sad boy albums can feel like when you scratch at them. I'll look at the lyrics, sometimes I'm like, oh, this is about nothing, right?
Well, I look at something like the Glow Up. I think that's a really good track to pull out because, yeah, like everything you're saying, like I really empathize with because it's recently, just this is kind of a tangent, but like recently, like I just looked at a little bit of the speech that Ketanji Brown Jackson, the new Supreme Court justice, did, where when she was accepting, and she was basically talking about how, like, for her as a Black woman, her grandma was a slave and like could never imagine like her in the position that she's in now. And I think like for people who aren't Black, well, especially white people, it's like I think there can be a level of like looking at Black experience and feel it, and it's so, if it feels so outlandish and horrible that it can feel like science fiction in some ways. Like, how could this be real? How could these things have happened? And I think like in some ways, your album, it does a really good job, I think, of presenting so many of these things, like whether it's the sundown towns or lynchings or Klansmen, or even like, I think something that I really liked is that in songs like The Glow Up or Winner's Circle, you have these moments, and feel free to correct me. I guess I'll say this is how I feel when I'm listening to your album. There are these moments where I can see myself navigating white spaces growing up and maybe like not being comfortable with my Black identity or taking pride in those parts of my identity. And I see a lot of that kind of coming out in some of the tracks. And it's like, I think that alone is disrupting the space in a good way. At the top of the interview, you were talking about how, like, in some ways, like, when you approach a project, it's like, okay, you have these interests that you're interested in exploring, and you make the record and you put it out there, and it's like, whatever happens in some senses. And I'm curious, like, when you're making Dark Matters, thinking about some of those themes on the album, especially related to history, like I think, like you were saying, like the Tulsa Massacre, for instance, is like one like you're talking about. Most people aren't going to hear about it until like they're older and probably go out of their way to hear about it. Were those kinds of things that you were putting into the album just because like those are things you were learning about at the time, or were you in some ways maybe like using this space as a way to get some of that history out in a different way? Because I find it's like a really interesting, like in an album, to put it in an album, it's like a really interesting way of potentially getting people to learn about that history.
I would say, as far as like wanting to like inform or whatever, like I don't know. I think it probably comes from a place of that, like, anger, and me trying to like sort of you know get get that out of my system. Just yeah, I mean, in a big way. Sometimes that stuff gets to me, and I don't always have a way of expressing it in a way that's obviously legal or anything. And I'm allowed to do that when I record music. So let me get some things off my chest, and it feels good. But yeah, I don't know, man. You can't like, people can't even most of the time tell what you're saying anyway when you're playing live or whatever. So a lot of the times you just kind of got to hope for the best in that way. But for me, yeah, it's just like you know, yeah, it's just coming from a place of like genuine confusion and anger, and you know, and if people can learn from it, then great. But it's not necessarily like my.
Do you like playing live? I mean, I know you were talking at the top of the show that like you're planning on touring the album a bit, but
Yeah, yeah, I love it. That's most of the reason why I do this. I don't recording is whatever to me. Um, most of most of my enjoyment from my past bands even was from just you know interacting live with my bandmates and having fun on stage and sort of having that space. Um, I used to always say to people or new people that I met was who maybe never done that or like when they're like talking about oh, I could never get on stage and like perform something or do something like that. And I just sort of looked at it like, like when I had a long day of work and I have a show, or I had a long, like, week or month of work and I have a show to look forward to, that's like kind of the one time that I get to like, yeah, it's like my time.
yeah,
This is my little 45 minutes where, I get to just say my piece and anything goes within reason and you get to be loud, you get to be quiet, you get to do whatever you need to do. And a lot of people also like don't get that. They get to
yeah,
like go to the gym or something, you know what I mean? Like in adulthood especially, like so for me it's always sort of like felt like this like sacred, kind of way for me to like deal with deal with life. I remember this is way earlier on when I was like really getting into music, and I wasn't very good at jazz at this point, um, and my teacher at the time was like really trying to get me to go to this like supposedly open like sit-in session at this place in DC, and technically speaking, it was, but most of the people that went there have been playing for like decades. And there's like these one or two guys that would just like, you know, they look like they could have had a job anywhere, like doing anything. And this was just something that they like did to like tie one on, just like get it out. And they were switching instruments. This one guy in particular, he was like ripping on piano and then he got up and played killer drums, and it just looked like he was having the most fun of his life. He didn't care who he's playing with. He was just having so much fun. It's like this cathartic experience for him. And he was just dressed like whatever, and it seemed like he just like had a drink and like went home afterwards. And I was just like, there's something like really special about that guy. He has this like immense power because he can play so well and so freely. Um, but he's just some guy walking down the street and he's just carrying this with him, and he has the power to express himself on that level. Like that's so cool, so
I really really love that. I mean, I'm wondering if there's a. Do you feel like you're at the place of being able to express at that level, of just being able to go on and be like, I truly can kind of do whatever and feel comfort in this space and in my body and what I'm getting to do up here?
well, I mean, it depends on who I'm playing with. um I think if I was playing with some people that were like on the same wavelength, for instance, like we could probably show up with like nothing planned and like figure it out. And I think that's really like a really special wavelength to be on with people. So in some senses, yes. I feel like I had this one experience. So the guy who recorded my stuff, he's recorded all my records. We've known each other since music school, and we were in bands. He was in Grasses Green also, and we just been playing together for a really long time. and we had this gig at SUNY Purchase, and a friend of mine was gonna sub on bass, and we really were just doing it because they were giving us a whole bunch of money to play at college. You know, it was like a chill show. It wasn't like crazy, you know. And he learned all the songs in the wrong key because like my earlier songs were like tuned a half step down or a whole step down, and yeah, I told him this probably like 25 times, you know, and we had never played together. We didn't get to practice together, and he was just gonna show up. He's a phenomenal like bassist. Like he's incredible, you know, and he's playing like multiple gigs a week with like all these different people and stuff like that. So you know, I trusted him, but you know, we're like setting up about to play, and he was like, "So what? Which one of these songs are in the different keys?" And I just like looked at him and I was like, "All of them." And his face just went like blank, like, "Oh crap." You know, and because me and Mike were on such like a comfortable level, we just kind of looked at each other and we're like, "Okay." So we just went in and just like we're super confident about everything. We got weird with it in the little spaces where he didn't know what he was supposed to do. And he was good enough to kind of fake it. And legit, there were like college kids coming up to us being like, "Yo, that was like really, really, really awesome. Like, it was like cool." Like, I was just like, "Did you realize that one of the people on stage didn't know any of the songs?" And they're like, "Oh, really?" And I was like, "Wow, we must have really like covered it up really well." And also just like that confidence and just like having fun also too.
Mm-hmm.
That element, that like freeing element that you get, you know, when you're performing, that must have come across. And so like, you know, so in that way, I guess maybe so. I've actually have been toying around with the idea of just doing more like songs like those jazz with Namdi things,
Yeah.
and just doing that live with like a few different musicians and having that be like another iteration of Monica. But I haven't gotten that far in my head yet. But it'd be really fun, I think.
No, that's interesting. Like I think this season of the show we've been talking to people like from different industries and stuff. But I think one thing that has been true with like everybody we've talked to is kind of like navigating how to make like navigating like the reality of like the dream. So like in this case it's like playing music and like doing that as a career, or like doing that in a way that feels good and life sustaining. I'm wondering like what's kind of your relationship to music now? Like is it something that you how should I ask this? What I'm trying to say, Ben? Like I'm kind of just kind of. I feel like a lot of people.
I understand.
Yeah.
Um, well, I mean, you know, everybody's different, and honestly, I live in New York City and Brooklyn and stuff, and a lot of people have aspirations, you know,
Yeah.
big dreams, and sometimes that means like quote unquote making it or whatever. And for me, you know, nothing's happened overnight. Nothing's happened, you know, to the point where like I can't go to CVS and, you know, on my own I have to send somebody for me because the masses are just gonna hound me. You know, I don't have that. Um, so for me, yeah, like I think it's more like if you're not getting that satisfaction just from like you know the joy from playing or whatever like that, then like chances are, you know, unless you're like Taylor Swift or something, like you you probably shouldn't like devote like too much into this because you're not gonna get like it's not gonna seem worth it because like you get kicked around a lot, and like it economically also it's not sustainable. Like, so, you know, if 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 what you want is the things that I was just talking about before, and you feel that way, um, whether you're like highly skilled or not, if you have the feeling and you got the spirit, go for it. Follow that feeling because life's too short, you know? But like, if you just want to be like famous or something, like, I don't know, you're going to get pretty frustrated unless you're lucky. But like, yeah, it's just, I don't know, for me, like, if you're measuring success or like whatever I'm trying to go after, you know, the only way to stay grounded and to feel good about myself is to kind of focus on you know, those little things and find joy in that.
No, and that story you told, I feel like that's one where I'm like, oh yeah, this person is doing exactly the thing that they want to be doing, right? Like, I don't know how many people have that experience of like, oh, I want to be just like this person who can just walk onto the stage and be so comfortable. And yeah, I feel like we've talked to a lot of people who are, and I'll say this is true of me too. You just kind of muddle through where you're like, I think this feels good. This sometimes feels good, but I don't always know if I'm headed in the right direction.
No, I mean, at the beginning of the year we talked to this musician Matthew Milia, who's like a singer-songwriter type, and something that has really stuck with me that he was talking about that's basically in the same vein as you is like the idea of compromise, and like how he doesn't view it as compromise when it's like taking like a more boring job or whatever and then like doing music on the side, and how he views it more as like calibration. It's just kind of like this different way of calibrating your life in order to do the thing that you actually like, and how that's really sustaining.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of stuff you can do that, like, for instance, like, will sustain your life. You know what I mean? And that doesn't have to be like something like you're meant to do. There's a lot of stuff for a person to get into. And it doesn't have to be like this like deep, passionate thing. I just think like with something like music, you know, I don't know, you can't, it's not for the faint of heart. Because it can suck. It can really suck. you know? I don't know.
No, I mean, at the beginning of the year we talked to this musician Matthew Milia, who's like a singer-songwriter type, and something that has really stuck with me that he was talking about that's basically in the same vein as you is like the idea of compromise, and like how he doesn't view it as compromise when it's like taking like a more boring job or whatever and then like doing music on the side, and how he views it more as like calibration. It's just kind of like this different way of calibrating your life in order to do the thing that you actually like, and how that's really sustaining.
Yeah, I mean, you just gotta like, your expectations just have to be like, you know, of this world. I mean, you know what I mean? Like, it's okay to have big dreams. I don't want to poo poo that or like make fun of anybody who like, really wants to be huge and great. But yeah, I mean, that's not going to happen for everybody. And there's really no shame in, I mean, I teach kids guitar, and, we don't make a lot of money at the place that I work at, but it's fine. And, I play my little shows and stuff, and I work at a venue. Whatever I can do really. And, some of it's not glamorous. um, but if I can still, have access to playing around here and playing with the people that I play with and whatever, at the end of the day, there are enough hours in the day to make it all work, and it doesn't have to be all one or the other. Like, trust me, I would love to just be on the road all the time and for this to be my job and whatever, but I'm at peace with the fact that it's not that simple, and this is just my way of doing it for now.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think something you had said earlier about like going to play shows and like having that 45 minutes or however long to kind of be in this community of other people who are all interested in the same thing. Yeah, I'm finding that especially since the pandemic, like that's so powerful and like really easy to underestimate. Like, like I went to grad school for creative writing, and like all those years doing that, like, you're surrounded by other people who are writers and are interested in those things. And then when you graduate, like a lot of those people move away, and you really underestimate like how powerful that is. Yeah.
I could see that because writing, yeah, you don't, it's a different beast. But when you have people to bounce ideas off of or other people's stories, you can kind of draw inspiration from or whatever. I mean, having that workshopping community is probably very, very powerful.
For sure.
Is there is there anything that we haven't asked you that you would want to say?
I don't know. We covered a lot of the bases.
Well, Devin, I mean, this has been great. I really appreciate you, answering all of our questions and coming on. It's been really, really good to talk to you.
Cool. Thanks. Yeah. Happy to do it.
And that was our conversation with Devin McKnight of Maneka. Again, really insightful conversation, really fun. Again, I felt like listening to Devin's music and talking to him, I felt pretty seen and like my own experiences as a Black person who, grew up in a pretty affluent white suburb. Dark Matters is a pretty challenging album that kind of got me thinking about my own past. So it was really fun to talk with him and learn a little bit more about how it came to be, and especially how he kind of works through his own position as like an artist and kind of making it work, as in relation to like the rest of his life.
Yeah, I like really. I feel like I'm envious in a lot of ways, like the way that he talks about art, and I think the way that he talks about music. If you've listened this far, there's that moment where he talks about looking up to someone who just gets on stage and like really vibes with the music and is enjoying themselves and like feeling themselves and kind of singing to people and getting people like excited. And having that as a jumping off point where it's like, when I'm putting in the work, I know what I'm going for. I know what I want to be. I know that like this joy comes to me from the work and from being here 100% of the time, right? Where it's like I get to just like really feel this. And I think for me, I won't speak for Phil, but I know that my relationship with the work of art feels more complicated, right? Where it's like sometimes I'm like, this just fucking blows. Like I just hate this. This is some stupid stuff. Like what am I doing? There'll be times, right, where it's like I'm like 2 pages into a draft and I'll like look at the last sentence I wrote and I'm like, that's the dumbest thing I've ever seen, and like I don't know that I should be doing this, right? Where it's like there isn't always that kind of euphoric feeling. And I don't know. I really appreciated that he was like, I don't know. I feel like you kind of have to have that feeling because of the grind of, not being paid for it sometimes or not being paid enough for it, that it's like you do have to have that passion. And sometimes I'm like, I don't know. Do I have that passion?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think, something that I think it made it into the episode because, we edited out some questions that we had during the conversation. But, I think right from the get-go, something that struck me about Devin is like, he's very casual and like nonchalant about his work. At least like outwardly, like when he's talking about it, like I hear, like listening to an album like Dark Matters, if you'll check it out afterwards, or if you've already listened to it, it's like a very unique album, like very smart, very layered, and not something that would be easy to make. and for him to kind of have that that kind of personality to still approach it with like, oh yeah, I made this thing, it's cool, people listen to it. You know, like it's something that I am so envious of. Like I wish I was able to have that kind of relationship to my work, whether it's just like you know, a front, for lack of a better word, in terms of how you talk about it to others, or if that's actually how he feels on a day-to-day basis. It's just like, it feels like such a much healthier way to approach creating things, where you're not kind of necessarily looking at its value based around, you know, how many people are consuming it, right? And, you know, maybe this is something that is easier to maybe to get to that point as a musician, because like part of your job, right, is to go in front of the audience who is going to be consuming your work, versus, at least like for me, like a lot of my work, I'm like posting it online, it's published online, like I don't meet 99% of the people who interact with it at all. So like I don't really have to face that in the same way, and maybe you're able to get like tougher skin, or just like a healthier connection to it when you, like, part of your job is to be like looking at the people that are interested or not, and kind of figuring out how then you can have a healthy relationship to it. That's something that's kind of, I'm thinking about as I'm talking.
No, that's a really good,
stupid, but
that's a really good, no, I think that's a really good thought, where it's like, yeah. And I think we do kind of briefly touch on this too, where it's like, yeah, you get real world, pretty instantaneous feedback when you're up on a stage that short of going to a reading, you're probably not gonna like really experience.
And who listens at those anyway?
Whew, tough but fair.
Yeah, so, you know, this conversation, again, really good. I'm glad that Devin came on, and I'm glad that, again, the algorithm randomly suggested this to me after probably listening to some shit like All Time Low, to be honest. So yeah, in terms of where you can find us, you can hit us up at Twitter at originstory_, as well as our email, the originstorypod.com. You can find me on Twitter at 3D Cisco. And Ben, where can they find you?
You can find me at sad_radio_lad. Have we talked about, you can find Maneka at Maneka Devin on Twitter. And you can also check out his website, Maneka at .bandcamp.com.
And yeah, check out his latest album. It's called Dark Matters. It's available like everywhere, I would assume, at this point. Thanks again to Ryan Hopper, who does the awesome intro and outro music that you hear after every show. And thanks to Melody Hirsch, who does all of the design work for Origin Story, from the website to the social media posts that we make. Yeah, and again, leave us some review. Yeah, give us some feedback.
If you are listening right now and you don't know how to do that, Phil has posted on Twitter a couple times now some helpful ways to figure out how to post a review, and we're asking because it helps a lot.
And if you do it, then you should like also get your friend to do it too. Like if you're just hanging out, like make it like a fun party game. You know, like you're all drinking. Like take a shot each time you drink. You'll get a better review each time you do it. So yeah, with that, that wraps us up for today. You can check us out again here in 2 weeks for our next episode of Origin Story.
Catch you then.
You